You think you're free, right? You wake up, go to work, pay your bills, scroll through your phone, nobody owns you. You're not anyone's property, you can quit your job whenever you want. But what if I told you that millions of people throughout history, and even today, have been trapped in a system that's almost worse than traditional slavery? A system where you're not bought and sold, but you can never leave, where you're not in chains. But you're still not free. It's called debt slavery. And its history is so disturbing, so clever, and so persistent that it's been used by empires, corporations, and governments for thousands of years to control entire populations. The craziest part? Most people don't even realize they're trapped until it's too late. So today, we're diving deep into the hidden history of debt slavery, from ancient Mesopotamia to modern-day sweatshops, from medieval Europe to Silicon Valley. We're going to uncover how this system works, why it's so effective, and why it still exists in the 21st century. This is going to get dark. This is going to get real. But by the end of this video, you'll never look at debt the same way again. Let's get into it. So where does this all begin? To understand debt slavery, we need to go way back to around 3000 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia. This is where some of the earliest human civilizations developed writing, laws, and debt. See, before money existed, people used barley and silver as a form of currency. Farmers would borrow seeds or animals to plant crops, promising to pay back the lender after harvest. Sounds fair, right? But here's the problem. What happens when your crops fail? What happens when there's a drought, or a flood, or locusts eat everything you own? You still owe the debt. And if you couldn't pay it back, ancient law allowed your creditor to take something else. You, your wife, your children. You would become a debt slave, forced to work off what you owed, sometimes for years, sometimes for life. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest legal documents in human history, actually regulated debt slavery. It said that if you couldn't pay your debts, you or your family members could be enslaved, but only for 3 years. After that, you'd be released. Seems almost reasonable, doesn't it? Except most people never made it out. Because while you were working off your debt, you still needed food, shelter, clothing. And guess who provided that? Your creditor. Who would then add those costs to your debt? It's a trap. A mathematical, legal trap that keeps you running on a treadmill you can never get off. And here's the thing that makes this so insidious. Debt slavery wasn't seen as cruel or unusual. It was just business. It was normal. It was how society worked. And that's the first lesson in the hidden history of debt slavery. When the system is designed to trap you, even the law won't save you. Fast forward a few thousand years to ancient Rome. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it was built on debt. As the Roman Empire expanded, it needed soldiers. Lots of them. So they recruited farmers, regular people who owned small plots of land, and sent them off to war for years at a time. But here's the problem. Who is taking care of your farm while you off conquering Gaul? Nobody. So these soldiers would return home after years of service to find their farms in ruins, their families starving, and their debts piling up. Local moneylenders, usually wealthy patricians, would offer loans to help them get back on their feet. But the interest rates were brutal. We're talking 50%, sometimes higher. And just like in Mesopotamia, if you couldn't pay, you became a debt slave. You'd lose your land, your freedom, everything. By the 4th century BCE, debt slavery had become such a massive problem that it nearly tore Rome apart. The poor were literally threatening to leave the city and form their own society because they were so trapped by debt. Rome's solution? They passed laws limiting debt slavery and eventually banned it for Roman citizens. Sounds great, right? Wrong, because they just shifted the system. Instead of enslaving their own citizens, Rome conquered other peoples and enslaved them through debt and tribute. The system didn't disappear, it just found new victims. And that's the second lesson. Debt slavery doesn't end, it just moves. Let's jump to medieval Europe. Now you might be thinking, wait, wasn't medieval Europe all about feudalism, lords and peasants and knights and stuff? Yes, but here's what they don't teach you in school. Feudalism was essentially a debt slavery system in disguise. See, after the fall of Rome, Europe descended into chaos. No central government, constant warfare, Viking raids, everyone trying to survive. In this environment, peasants made a deal with local lords. Protect us from invaders, and we'll work your land. Sounds reasonable, right? But here's the catch. You couldn't leave. You were bound to the land. You were called a serf, and while technically you weren't a slave, you weren't free either. You owed labor to your lord. You owed a portion of your crops. You needed permission to marry, to move, to do basically anything, and if you tried to run away, you'd be hunted down and punished. This system lasted for centuries. In Russia, serfdom wasn't abolished until 1861, the same year the American Civil War started. Think about that. Debt-based bondage existed in Europe well into the modern era. But it gets worse. Because even when serfdom was officially abolished, the debt didn't disappear. In many cases, former serfs were forced to buy their freedom by taking on massive loans from their former masters. So they went from being serfs to being debt slaves. Same cage, different name. Now let's talk about one of the darkest chapters in this history: colonialism. When European powers colonized the Americas, Africa, and Asia, they brought debt slavery with them. But they refined it, made it more efficient, more brutal. In Latin America, it was called debt peonage. Spanish and Portuguese colonizers would recruit indigenous workers and poor mestizos to work on plantations and in mines. They'd pay them wages, sure. But the workers had to buy their food, tools, and supplies from the company store, and guess what? The prices at the company store were always higher than their wages. So every day you worked, you went deeper into debt. And by law, you couldn't leave until your debt was paid off, which it never was. This same system was used in the American South after the Civil War. When slavery was abolished, plantation owners switched to sharecropping. Former slaves and poor whites would work the land in exchange for a share of the crops. But you guessed it, they had to rent the land, buy seeds and tools from the landowner, often at inflated prices. By harvest time, they'd be in debt. And the cycle would start over. One sharecropper in Mississippi described it perfectly. We were free, but we were still slaves. The system was so effective that in some parts of the South, it lasted until the 1960s. Let that sink in. Debt slavery in America, 6 decades ago. So you might be thinking, okay, that's all history. Surely we've moved past this, right? I wish I could tell you we have. But the truth is, debt slavery is alive and well in the 21st century. It just looks different. In South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, millions of people are trapped in bonded labor. They take loans, sometimes as small as $50, to pay for a wedding, a medical emergency, or a funeral. And then they work for years, sometimes generations, trying to pay it off. The International Labor Organization estimates there are over 20 million people in bonded labor. Worldwide right now, that's more than the entire population of Australia. In the Middle East, migrant workers often from the Philippines, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal are recruited to work in construction, domestic work, and service industries. But when they arrive, their employers confiscate their passports. They're paid below minimum wage, housed in terrible conditions, and trapped by the debt of their recruitment fees. It's called the kafala system, and human rights organizations call it modern-day slavery. And before you think, well, that's just developing countries, let me bring it closer to home. In the United States, private prison companies use inmates as labor, paying them pennies per hour while charging them inflated prices for phone calls, commissary items, and basic necessities. By the time they're released, many prisoners are deeper in debt than when they went in. Student loans have created a generation of young people who are decades away from financial freedom. Medical debt bankrupts hundreds of thousands of Americans every year. Payday loans trap people in cycles of endless interest payments. Different contexts, same system. So here's the question that's probably burning in your mind. Why does this keep happening? Why, after thousands of years, is debt slavery still a thing? The answer is simple and disturbing, because it works. Debt slavery is more profitable than traditional slavery. You don't have to buy or house slaves, they house themselves. You don't have to feed them, they feed themselves, often with their own money, and if they die or escape, you just find new ones. From an economic standpoint, it's efficient. But there's something deeper going on here. Debt slavery works because it operates in a gray zone. It's not illegal in the way that traditional slavery is. It hides behind contracts, laws, and financial systems. It disguises exploitation as personal responsibility. You signed the contract. You borrowed the money. This is just business. It's guilt-free exploitation. The system blames the victim. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Because when the system is designed to trap you, and society tells you it's your own fault. Escape becomes almost impossible, not just physically, but psychologically. So where does that leave us? We've traveled from ancient Mesopotamia to medieval Europe, from colonial plantations to modern sweatshops. And the pattern is clear. Debt slavery never really went away. It just evolved, adapted, found new victims. But here's the thing, awareness is the first step toward change. Throughout history, debt slavery has only been challenged when people stood up and said, "This isn't right. This isn't justice. This needs to end." In ancient Rome, the plebeians threatened to leave the city until debt laws were reformed. In the 19th century, abolitionists fought not just chattel slavery, but also debt peonage and sharecropping. Today, human rights organizations are exposing bonded labor and fighting for the rights of migrant workers. Change is possible, but it requires us to see the system for what it is. So the next time you hear someone drowning in student loans, medical debt, or payday loan interest, don't just think, well, they should have been more responsible. Ask yourself, is the system designed to trap them? The next time you buy something cheap online, ask, who made this, and what did they have to sacrifice? The next time you hear about immigration or labor rights, think, what would I do if I was in their shoes? Because the hidden history of debt slavery isn't just about the past. It's about right now. It's about understanding that freedom isn't just the absence of chains, it's the presence of real, meaningful choices. And until everyone has those choices, the fight isn't over. If this video opened your eyes, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden truths of history and society. And drop a comment below. Did you know about any of this? What surprised you the most? Let's keep this conversation going. Because awareness is power, and power is how we break the chains. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.